USAID? When did you serve? Where did you serve?
Actually, was not with USAID. That is, they are part of the Foreign Service, but I joined in 1967 with the United States Information Agency, which is now a part of the State Department. It no longer exists. But it always has cooperated very closely with the State Department and shares, of course, ambassadors and other diplomats in the Foreign Service. But I went to Brazil first because I had been in the Peace Corps in Brazil. And in fact, I had no interest in going into the Peace Corps, although I wanted a foreign experience. And one day, walking into the student union just weeks before graduation, a nice man in a suit and tie grabbed me and said, "You look like a candidate for the Peace Corps." And I said, "No, no." And he said, "Why?" I explained all the reasons why not. And he said, "Oh, we can arrange that. We can do, whatever you want. We can send you to Brazil." I wanted to go to Brazil. He said, "That's no problem. We can get you where you want to go," so forth. And I said, "Well, how can you do this?" And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm David Rockefeller." And I said, "I only know of one David Rockefeller, and he's the president of the Chase Manhattan Bank." And he said, "Ah, that's the one." And he said, "One day a year, I volunteer time to recruit for the Peace Corps, and Sergeant Shriver asked me to come to your university this year, and I signed up. And went to Brazil and had a wonderful project creating the first private welfare organization in Brazil, which is still in existence today and spread over the country. And because of the American ambassadors interested in that project, I got to know a number of the people at the American Embassy, and they said, "Why don't you join the Foreign Service? You are the type of person we want." And before I even left Brazil with the Peace Corps, I was already through the process of the exams for the Foreign Service and almost immediately went right back into Brazil with the American Embassy there as an assistant cultural attaché. So that was how it began. And then, of course, I had a tour of duty in Southeast Asia, and my last tour of duty was in Nairobi, Kenya, where I was again a cultural attaché. At that point, I came back to Washington to do my Washington career as a diplomat, and I was assigned to the policy office. And
Okay, so back up and just continue where you were.
So I finished my Washington policy office assignment, and at that point I was reassigned to the American Embassy in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I suddenly had this feeling that I had to remain in the U.S. And only years later, of course, looking back, do I realize I made the right decision. So I pondered, this is a very difficult decision for me to leave the diplomatic service after it was something I had sought after for a long time. But I did resign, and the very next day was hired to work with the Fulbright Scholarship Program, which is also a part of the United States Information Agency, and of course is the Congress's major federally funded scholarship program, which involves 150 other countries around the world. So for the rest of my career, I worked as the director of the Fulbright Scholarship Program in Washington until my retirement a few years ago, and moved out to Las Vegas, Nevada. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay. Your move to Las Vegas was quite an abrupt non sequitur to your life. You gave up a career to move to Las Vegas, and you really can't justify to yourself why you did that. Can we get into the move here? How did that occur? What was the motivation?
To sum that up, is what happened is all the way back to 1982, I was watching a television program and just flipping through the channels, an old Merv Griffin show came on from Hollywood. And I got it just before the commercial, but he was holding up a book written by a man named Benjamin Creme, and he said he was going to devote his entire show to this one book, and he and Gore Vidal, well-known author, And I said, oh, I can't miss Gore Vidal and Merv Griffin discussing someone's book for an hour. But little did I know it was about a group of beings that Ben Krem said have now returned, which he calls the Masters of Wisdom. And of course, I had to learn more about that and bought the book. And it was only within months after that I met some of these individuals myself. But over the 20 years I was involved in that in Washington, I met many people in Washington circles and in government, out of government, who had their own experiences with this group of beings called Masters of Wisdom, which are really people from our human evolution who have gone way, way ahead of us and are now about to go public about how they have been carrying out a design or a plan for the human race. And we are about to leap into a new consciousness, a new time. And I was fascinated with this and realized that, you know, I had to be in the U.S. to do this. And slowly I was pulled in and eventually was asked to move out of Washington. But I didn't take it very seriously until just a year before my actual retirement. And one of these Masters of Wisdom visited me on a Saturday when I was vacuuming my bedroom floor, sort of tidying up, and said, if you sit down, I will mentally implant images in your head of where you are going to live in the future. Well, the future is a very big place, so I didn't think much of it. And I've had contacts with these beings over the years, so this was nothing new for me at the time, although I did not talk about it very publicly within the government circles, because after all, I was still in a very sort of sensitive position. But what happened was within weeks, I was sort of directed to visit Las Vegas, although no one ever told me to visit Las Vegas. The only thing I know of the images I saw, it looked like a dry desert areas, but with a lot of green. And since I hadn't spent any time in this area, I had no idea of the contrast between irrigation and then dry desert mountains and hills, which I was seeing, and also given the tour of a house that I'd never been in before. Well, one week when I was in the midst of doing my vacation, which I had plugged in and had to stick with certain dates, I was forced to seriously think about where I was going to go since all my vacation plans had fallen in. And I returned to my office after lunch to find my office flooded with literally hundreds of brochures about visiting Las Vegas, Nevada. And I thought it was a joke being played on me by some of my staff, but they proved to me pretty definitively that no one could have gone into my office while I was out to lunch, because they were sitting in the only position where they would have seen people go in or out. And literally there were thousands, I think, of these brochures in every conceivable nook and cranny of my office. And I even called some of the travel offices in our area saying, did anyone pick up maybe 500-600 travel brochures on Las Vegas? And they said, we don't get that many travel brochures. We have maybe a 6 or 7 at most. We don't, you know, these things are expensive. Well, we picked them up and we noticed that everyone was for Las Vegas, and it just seemed to me the thing to do. So that afternoon, bought a ticket to Las Vegas after the travel agent said that everything was full. It was a weekend of the big Comdex convention with every hotel room is filled in this city. But still I got a plane ticket, came to Las Vegas, checked into my hotel, and within the second day I met someone who introduced himself as a real estate agent who was having the day off because his clients had all canceled. And I said, oh, it must be fascinating. It's such a fast-growing city. And said, yeah, let's go out and look at it. Do you have time? And so we did. And I was very surprised when we pulled up to a place that resembled in every way and in every detail what I had seen mentally projected into my mind by one of these Masters of Wisdom only 6 weeks earlier. And I knew that they were trying to tell me something. And they had warned me that if I wanted to be useful, that I was going to have to move out of Washington. So I purchased the house, much against my better judgment, but thought I should do it. Hung on to it for about 9 months until I was waiting for some opportunity to retire with benefits. And right after Christmas, I walked into my office and they announced to me that Congress had passed a special bill. It was focused on our agency only. There would only be a handful of people allowed to take up this special retirement, and the director would have to approve every one, and that there was zero chance of me getting it because of my position. But within 24 hours, I was one of the 6 or 7 approved and was gone by the end of the week. And within 2 weeks, I had moved everything to Nevada and was living here, waiting for my sort of next opportunity to open up. So I have retired early from my point of view, moved out here, and I know that the work I will be doing is definitely when extraterrestrials are introduced to humanity. That I know this will be one of the points, at least in this country, where someone has to be who has a diplomatic background, and therefore they've asked me to fill that role. The details are not fully known yet, and perhaps even talking about this is more than I should be doing, but I do it only in the sense that I know we are very, very close now to the time when this is going to happen. But it is an event that has been announced in many ways worldwide. For example, many Catholics know Medjugorje, and that has been going on for the last 15, 20 years as well. And they keep saying there's a very important event that's going to happen that will be very, very traumatic. And that event, of course, I know is as the day when the Masters of Wisdom will come forward on international television and introduce us to a whole category of other beings, not just from other planets, but other beings of very high consciousness that we know almost nothing about. And this is going to begin a time of the transformation of the consciousness of everybody on this planet. And it is being talked about in many circles. I know that I can understand why many people do not want to talk about this, and that when I talk about it with people in important positions who have household names, they said, please never use my name because people will think I'm crazy. And I'm not going to come out and talk about this until the head of this group, who is called Maitreya, comes out and talks about it first, which he will do, we are told, on a major network show, first here in the U.S., then in Japan, then probably in London, and then they'll do a worldwide hookup, because at that point, so many people will be intrigued about this man and what he has to say about our changing times, that they will demand that there be a major television hookup. And that will be sort of their address and introduction to humanity. And we sort of, Benjamin Creme, who talks about this, calls it the Day of Declaration, because it's sort of like a Christian Pentecost 2,000 years ago, where everybody's going to hear this message in their native language. So there'll be absolutely no mistake about what the message is. And if you're watching TV, you certainly don't want to miss this event. And if you're not watching TV, you'll hear it anyway, because everybody's going to hear this. That is known by a great many people. And there are many political leaders who know this and are trying to prepare for it. In other words, it's almost like preparing for some disaster, because nobody knows quite how humanity is going to react. Maitreya says it's going to be fine, but we all know with the politics of the planet that this is going to be a very traumatic moment when they're going to have to readjust their thinking about everything, about who they thought they were, where they came from, and where they are going to. And much of that information now is going to be made public by these beings in a very rapid fashion. So we are talking about an enormous leap in consciousness, another leap into another time, and simply rebuilding this planet. And if you don't think the planet needs rebuilding, well, then you are part of the problem. Because the United Nations tells us that every day there's still 24,000 people a day dying of starvation. There are huge imbalances in this planet, not just monetary, but imbalances in every possible way. And why we need to be intervened by these other beings at this time, which are greater, have a greater consciousness than our own, is because we have sort of gotten ourselves in a corner and we're not able to get ourselves out. That's the bottom line. That no matter what we do as humanity, no matter how bright we may be or how brilliant our political leaders may be, the job at this point is just too huge for humanity to take on itself. So we're talking about a total transformation, and there are those people who tell us that the transformation will take place in maybe 20 years' time, where this entire planet will be rebuilt. Cities will be torn down, we are told, and rebuilt. New technologies will become available. There will be no use for fossil fuels. We will be given a new energy source. All this is already on the drawing boards, and I think most scientists already know that we've approached a point where we're about to jump into this new approach. But Maitreya and the masters that are with him, and of course the extraterrestrials, the space brothers, whatever you want to call them, are going to also help us with that technology, and they already are helping us, for those who already know that we're getting some help. But all that is going to be speeded up enormously after this major television program.
You've mentioned household word politicians, heads of state, people that you've met who have confided in you that they have also had contact with these same beings and have had their lives changed by this unknown hidden agenda that seems to be unfolding. Could you name some of these people?
Well, I think there are a few people that wouldn't mind having their names mentioned. And certainly Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, I think he knows that he did not get out of prison by some miracle of man. He knows he was visited by a being who was very superior, who he believes was Jesus Christ, because he's a Christian. It was, in fact, Maitreya, the head of this hierarchy. He appears to people in a way that they will understand from their own background and experience. The late King of Jordan was somebody who had met Maitreya and believed him to be the Mahdi, the one that in Islam will be a great teacher and change the world. So everybody understands this from a little different background. How Mikhail Gorbachev understands this, I don't know. But I do know from friends who have told me they have had meetings with Gorbachev who said that he wouldn't mind having his name used in this respect, and I believe that's true. And I don't believe that anyone's really focused on asking him specifically about that. But I am convinced he's had contact with Maitreya from his days when he was still the power in the old Soviet Union. And because of that, Maitreya had announced to journalists in London publicly that had to be one of the first major changes on the planet, because the problems of the Cold War, the East-West thing, had to be resolved. And it was resolved very fast, and this was all published in advance in various places, including a magazine called Share International, which has a habit of collecting all of the pronouncements of Maitreya's staff in London, saying what will happen in the next 12 months, 24 months, and where the focus is. And we all knew the focus was on the Soviet Union, and it came down much faster than most people expected. We were told in advance that when Nelson Mandela was still in prison, we were told, and it was published, that he would be released and he would negotiate and form a new government that would have a total change in South Africa. So these are key leaders. These are political leaders who have made enormous contributions. And King Hussein of Jordan made enormous contributions to the Middle East settlement. We are at a point now where I think most people never thought we would come in our lifetime, to the point when we thought the Palestinians might have their own homeland, a place of their own. Well, that's being negotiated, and of course there are people who don't want that to happen, but it will, and Maitreya said it will, even though there will be difficulties. And there are many other things that have happened around the planet that since 1980 or 1977, when Maitreya came into the world, that was about the time that President Sadat opened that enormous overture with the Israelis, and suddenly the president of Israel, the prime minister of Israel, was talking with the head of the Egyptian government. Well, this was a real breakthrough. That all started in about 1977, and since then, the world has changed dramatically. Still not where we want it, but it is a lot better off, and this is all due to the contact of this group of beings that we call masters of wisdom, who are the leadership of this planet, who are guiding the planet, have a plan for it, and are working with members of humanity, whoever will work with them. My role is very small compared to others. I have met people whose roles it is to feed the hungry after the Day of Declaration and solve this food problem. Well, that's an enormous task. But they have said yes and are prepared to do it. So there are many of these people around the planet, and many of them have been told by Maitreya not to talk about their involvement because it would hurt the work that is going on currently. And I can understand that, because if you begin to announce this before it's time, you open yourself up to attack and criticism from many groups in many places. But it's going to happen anyway, irregardless of they can slow things down, but they cannot stop it at this point. It is on a track, and now I think it's only a matter of a very short time that this is going to take place. And I can talk about many of my experiences because I do not have a household name. People don't know who I am. So they can simply brush me off and say, well, who is this guy? What does he know anyway? If Queen Elizabeth came out and stood on her balcony and addressed the British and said, I have met this man, his name is Maitreya, he lives right here in London, and I believe, he is the one who is going to take us into a new time. If you're a Christian, you can think of him as the Christ. Half of the British people might accept this, or at least take it very seriously, but only because of her status in the country. Well, that's not what they want. That's not what Maitreya wants. He wants to do this on everybody's conviction, knowing it from themselves, not because someone they admire says it. So I can talk openly about this in advance because nobody knows me. And they can reject whatever I say. But they might find it intriguing enough to pay attention. And if they did a little homework, they would find that there's a lot of information on the internet. There's a lot of information of people who have written books recently who pretty much present an outline of what is going to happen. So the information is out there if you want to get it now.
Have you had discussions with some of your diplomatic colleagues regarding this situation in your life and their work as well?
Yes, of course. There are a few people who are close friends of mine and work in the government circles where I worked and are wanting to be a part of this, of course. And they recognize themselves how badly this is needed. It is those who have worked and lived overseas who really understand the imbalances in our world. This is really a problem in the U.S. today. When you talk about we need to change the way we live, most Americans would say, why? Aren't we comfortable? Aren't we just doing fine? And the answer really is no. You have to talk to the people in the rest of the world who are outside of a few Western European countries, or maybe Japan and the US and Canada. The rest of the world is really hurting. And much of it comes from the economic situation. And Maitreya has let it be known, from his point of view, the the global economic system is broken and has to be replaced. And he said it can be replaced very easily, but people have to first recognize that the old system is broken. Well, it is the U.S., it is Wall Street, it is the International Monetary Fund. These are the people who really control this international system. And until they recognize the system is broken, until the American people recognize that, there is really no reason to try to introduce something new because it will be rejected. Therefore, Maitreya and the masters will wait until the system appears in distress to Americans and a few Western Europeans. When they start crying out, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong, then he will appear and say, okay, here is the solution. I have it for you. This is what you have to do. And I know that there are more and more economists who are talking about the system being broken. There is a wonderful video that PBS put out called The Crash that came out about a year ago. I only saw it played a few times on TV, but you had top economists in this country. You had people like Jeffrey Sachs at Harvard, and you had a number of other people who are well known saying, look, this system is hurting most of the world. The benefits are coming to the U.S. and a couple other countries, but the rest of the world is not getting the benefits because the system has failed to promise them what it was intended to produce, and that was a certain amount of wealth around the world, or anyone who wanted to participate. And we saw that a few years ago in the currency crashes in the Soviet Union. Here they are, they changed their system of government, and the people of Russia today are living worse off than they probably ever have. They're ready for change. It is those of us who think we're living well. It's an illusion of living well. We're not. We don't understand how we are being crushed by an overworked, working too many hours, not having quality time to spend with family and friends, not having time to do those things that we feel we need to do if we want to raise our own consciousness. We're simply too focused on work. There is another way, and as Maitreya said, we can have a lifestyle that everyone will be happy with. We can have a lifestyle where you can focus most of your time on developing who you are, not simply going to a job that you may like or may dislike. And too many people dislike the jobs they have, but we have to do it because that's part of the system. All this is going to be a dramatic change. And how it plays out, we're not really sure yet. We're just told that things are under control and it will work out, and that they already know the future, and the future is going to be miraculous. It's going to be, if people say, well, it sounds like heaven and earth, well, that's it. It is going to be like heaven on earth. We need it.
What has been articulated to you concerning the planet's environment?
Well, that is one of the first things that they are going to tackle. After they manage to feed those who are starving, then the environment is the number one priority. Whether we know it or not, we are told that we're killing ourselves. And one of the main reasons for these space brothers, the extraterrestrials, coming here in the last, let's say, 30, 40, 50 years, has really been an operation of cleaning up radiation leakages. We do not understand yet how deadly radiation leakages are to the human system. We are suffering from illnesses, and in many cases, if it's not the water, it's radiation from atomic energy. all these plants that have been built up. Chernobyl was just one example. We have to get rid of all those. There's no place for that in the new system. And if we did not have our environment being cleaned up by these space brothers, we would probably all be dead. It is really that simple. That has been their major role with us up to this point. Just keeping us alive by keeping the environment halfway in balance as we continue to destroy.
Do you have any information on the abduction phenomenon or contact phenomenon that's so widespread today? How does that relate to what you're describing?
I think that there are people who may have been, the right word is not abduction. Anyone who has been on a craft from another planet has volunteered. The problem is they don't remember volunteering. And there are a lot of people, I believe, who are simply under the illusion, because there's a lot of mental impressions being given humanity right now. And I think people are becoming more telepathic. They are beginning to understand what is happening on the planet, and therefore they fantasize that their role is much bigger than it actually is. They are being prepared for this time of change on the mental plane, which comes into us subtly, and they think that they have been taken away. But I do not, everyone that I have talked to who should know claims that there have been no abductions against anyone's free will. And that's the whole point. Even Maitreya and the Masters see humanity's free will as something very sacred, and they will not invade upon that. And unless we give our permission, and unless we work with them freely, they will not do anything. So it is up to us to make the decisions to work with these people on whatever dimension or category of being you want to place them. And everybody sees them as different. But that will be spelled out in a very scientific way in the near future. So we won't have to use our religious background to understand. You know, I think there was a poll saying 80-some% of Americans believe in angels, and some fantastic number believes they've been contacted by an angel. Well, I would sort of turn that around and say they were contacted by one of the people in the hierarchy of the Masters of Wisdom. They come at various levels. And many people have been contacted, that is true. But they're not angels, they're Masters of Wisdom. They are part of this hierarchy that lays out the groundwork for the plan that is to go forward, which is created by an even higher consciousness. And I never use the word God because even a higher consciousness than me does not know who God is. So how can I begin to approach the topic? All we know is that there's a hierarchy, some sort of system that always looks after us in our place in the universe. And we're going to be introduced to that system and going to have contact with it for the first time, perhaps, in humanity's existence. We will understand our true scientific position in our universe and know where we came from and where we are headed.
This is October 2000, and we spoke off the record a number of months ago, and you mentioned to me that this month could indicate or bring forth some indicators that these events are starting to transpire. Could you get specific and describe that?
The indicators, of course, come from many sources because there are many people, there are religious groups who follow this, but they understand it from a different point of view. There are religious groups who believe that the Christ has reappeared in the world. There are religious groups that believe the Jewish Messiah has appeared, and so forth and so on. You go around the world and people describe it in different ways. They know something is happening that is very, very big, but they don't have the entire picture. So they describe it in words that they can only understand. And that usually comes out of a religious tradition. And what we are going to do is sort of turn that tradition into something more on a higher evolved level and call it science. And yes, the masters work with people in the religious community, and many of those have been announcing lately that they have had contact, which are telling them that things are about to happen and it could happen in October, November. But it is always very, very difficult to pinpoint these down to human time, because only humans know time. If you're beyond the human level, there is no such thing as time as we know it. And this is very difficult for humanity to understand. The Masters of Wisdom, the extraterrestrials that visit our planet, do not know time as we know it. They know cycles of work and cycles of rest and cycles of different things, but they do not know time. So it's very difficult for them, even projecting into the future and scaling that to human perception of time, which is a very fluid sort of thing. So we can say that, yes, maybe something is going to happen, but the biggest indicator I think Maitreya has given us is simply saying that when the U.S. stock market fails and people recognize the system as having crashed, then within days he will come forward and speak to the public, first to the U.S., to calm the panic, basically, and tell people it's going to be all right. There's another way out of this. There is not a problem. But the system, he says, has already failed on his timeline. It's already happened. It's just precipitating out into human time at this point, which could be at any time. It could be this week, it could be next month. And as the markets fluctuate and swing more wildly, I think we are closer home to what we can expect. We have been told that, for example, that the Japanese will probably begin to create the problem, and that's sort of happened already.
Much time? Are we done?
He basically...
There's some other things I'd like to ask. We'll see. Yeah, go ahead.
He made a point that the Japanese hold huge amounts, billions and billions of dollars in U.S. treasury bonds. And he said they would only cash those in if they have to. Well, only a week ago they discovered that the Japanese government had been dipping into the retirement funds without announcing it to the public to bail out the failing Japanese banks. And the banks still are not solvent. And Seidman said, if they're in a crunch for money, they're going to pull those bonds, and that's going to affect Wall Street. And Maitreya said, when the Japanese need their money out of the U.S., the market will fall. That will be the end of it.
So is that what's happening at this point?
If Bill Seidman thinks, he said basically the Japanese economy is failing. We do not realize it's failing. Its indicators are it's about to take a fall again.
Okay. We can keep it within the hour, Rob. Yeah, we'll keep it within the hour. How much time do we have left?
22 minutes.
22 minutes.
We can, what do you want to focus on?
Well, I want to keep this as objective and in the world as possible for the purpose of this. I mean, I'm extremely fascinated by your personal story, but we don't really have a whole lot of time. Did President Carter have any connection to any of these unfolding events? Does he have a role to play in this?
Well, I think several presidents had. It would be difficult for me to believe that President Carter did not have some involvement or knowledge, or even today have some knowledge, because there is a way of identifying people who know this story simply by the work they're doing, what they say. You can put pick out political leaders, and simply by the statements they make, or ex-political leaders, as you have them, by what they say, if they mesh with Maitreya's ideas, you know they had to have gotten this information from someplace. And there are books out on Maitreya's mission that are published, and if you read those books and then compare them to what certain heads of government are saying, you'll see that they're plagiarizing this material from this being called Maitreya. And you just know they've had contact. President Bush, for example, when I learned this meditation technique that Maitreya said would help him emerge faster, because it's sort of like us giving up a bit of our freedom of our free will, which then helps him contact people who don't even know he exists. We met in a house in Georgetown, which is part of the District of Columbia in Washington, at the home of one of President Bush's advisors. Now, this advisor did not take part in the meditations, but the hostess in the house who held the meetings, and we had many of them there, would invite President Bush over for dinner. And one evening when Bush was running his campaign against President Clinton, he said to the hostess of our meditation group, he said, "Tell me," he said, I think he meant it in a joking fashion, just saying, "Do you think I'm going to win this election against Clinton?" And she said, "No, Mr. President, Maitreya has already said you are not going to win." And he, instead of saying, "Who is Maitreya?" he said, "Oh, yeah, I think I should go home now." I'm sure he knew, and I know from other parties who will tell me that he did meet Maitreya, didn't know who he was, but did know he was somebody who had a lot of information, and did send several ambassadors to London to meet with Maitreya for certain meetings. Now, I can't prove that, but I'm sure it took place. So presidents have had contact. What they make of this is difficult to know. Certainly they've been curious. Whether they have worked directly with it, I do not know. I certainly know that there are people within the White House that know this story and do work with it, and how much of that information they share with their colleagues at the White House, I do not know.
How long or how far back in time in your personal life do your contact experiences go?
Way back. However, there's gaps. My first contact, I was only 4 years old, but it's very vivid in my mind. And only after I had sort of reinstated myself in 1982 with contact with these beings, did that experience become important again, because they warned me at that time. When I was 4 years old, they told me that this great being would come into the world and change the way we live, and that I would be a part of it if I wanted to. And although it seems like fantasy when you're a child at 4 years old, I never forgot that. And of course, my career, what I've done, we could talk about opportunities, but my life has sort of been on a path, and it has been on a track that I can see now very clearly. There was a Swedish philosopher who said, life can only be understood when you look at it backwards, but it has to be lived forwards. And that is true. The further you go down your life track, you see that the coincidences were not really coincidences. They were part of the plan to put you in a certain place at a certain time. And many of us, if we looked at our lives, we see that strange coincidences happened at just the right moment to take us a little further down the path of our life that we never expected to go down. And that is the work of the Masters of Wisdom. They do this. This is why they are here. And now they're going to do it openly, literally walking around, talking to people, giving lectures, being available for questions. It's going to be a dramatic change for humanity.